Welcome, everyone, to a story that unfolds in the heart of a picture-perfect suburban neighborhood, a place where manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and meticulously painted mailboxes create the illusion of perfection. But beneath the serene surface lies a tale of unexpected drama, petty power struggles, and the triumph of kindness over chaos. This is a story of how one person's quest of control collided with the unyielding spirit of community, and how a simple act of standing up for what's right can change everything. So sit back, relax. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In the quaint suburban utopia of Willow Creek, where every lawn is trimmed to perfection, mailboxes are painted in HOA-approved shades of beige, and even the squirrels seem to abide by the bylaws, there lived a woman named Karen. And not just any Karen, the Karen. She wasn't just your run-of-the-mill complainer who'd asked to speak to the manager at Starbucks because her latte foam wasn't symmetrical. No, this Karen was a self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek, reigning supreme as the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA. In her mind, she wasn't just maintaining order, she was preserving civilization itself. Karen's mission in life was simple: perfection. Anything that didn't fit her rigid definition of ideal was an affront to her very existence. A garden gnome on someone's front porch? Illegal. A car parked slightly off-center in the driveway? Unacceptable. Children playing too loudly at 3 p.m.? A crime against humanity. And don't even get her started on Halloween decorations. Last year, she wrote a 7-page email to the HOA board about how inflatable skeletons were a gateway to moral decay. But Karen's latest nemesis wasn't a rogue garden gnome or an overzealous trick-or-treater. No, it was something far worse. Jacob was a sweet 10-year-old boy who lived 2 houses down from Karen with his parents and golden retriever, Max. He also happened to use a wheelchair due to a congenital condition. Jacob didn't bother anyone. He spent most of his time reading books about dinosaurs or playing video games. But every morning at precisely 7:45 a.m., a school bus equipped with a wheelchair lift would pull up in front of Jacob's house to take him to school. And this, apparently, was an unforgivable sin in Karen's eyes. You see, Jacob's bus had the audacity, the gall, to block traffic for approximately 3 minutes while the driver operated the wheelchair lift and helped Jacob board safely. To any reasonable person, this would be a non-issue. But Karen? Oh no. Karen saw this as a direct assault on her God-given right to drive her Lexus SUV out of her driveway without delay. One fateful morning, as Jacob's bus arrived as usual, Karen stood by her window, clutching her coffee mug like a villain plotting world domination. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped furiously against the ceramic as she muttered under her breath. "This is outrageous," she hissed to no one in particular. 3 minutes? Do you know what I could accomplish in 3 minutes? I could send 5 emails. I could post 2 HOA updates on Facebook. I could reorder my organic kale powder. Karen decided she had had enough. Fueled by caffeine and righteous indignation, she stormed out her house in her leopard print slippers and matching robe, because even when angry, Karen believed in style. She marched straight into the middle of the street, waving her arms like an air traffic controller having a meltdown. "Stop this nonsense right now," she bellowed. The bus driver, a kind man named Mike who had been driving school buses for 20 years, rolled down his window and gave her a puzzled look. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "A problem?" Karen screeched, her voice reaching a pitch that probably scared off every bird within a 5-mile radius. "Yes, there's a problem. This bus is blocking the road. You're making me late for my yoga class." Mike blinked slowly. "Ma'am, it's 7:45 in the morning, and your point is?" Karen snapped. At this point, Jacob's mom, Emily, stepped outside to see what all the commotion was about. Emily was the polar opposite of Karen, calm, kind-hearted, and perpetually exhausted from juggling work and parenting. She approached cautiously but firmly. "Karen," Emily said with forced politeness, "is there something wrong?" "Yes." Karen turned on Emily like a hawk spotting prey. "Your son is taking too long to get on the bus. This is completely unacceptable. Do you realize how much traffic you're causing?" Emily stared at Karen in disbelief. "It's 3 minutes. 3 minutes adds up." Karen shrieked. Do you know how many 3-minute delays there are in a week? In a month? In a year? This is why our property values are going down. Emily raised an eyebrow. Our property values are going down because my son needs extra time to get on his school bus? Yes, Karen declared triumphantly, as if she'd just solved world hunger. This neighborhood used to be perfect before this started happening. Emily clenched her fists but kept her composure. Karen, she said through gritted teeth, Jacob has every right to take as much time as he needs to get on that bus safely. Well, Karen sniffed, crossing her arms dramatically. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere more accommodating. At this point, several neighbors had started gathering on their lawns to watch the spectacle unfold. Because, let's face it, who doesn't love some early morning drama? One neighbor even pulled out his phone and began recording. Because if there's one thing people love more than HOA drama, it's viral HOA drama. Karen noticed a growing audience, but instead of backing down as any sane person might, she doubled down. I'm going to report this, she announced loudly enough for everyone within earshot to hear. I'll call the city, the school district, the president if I have to. Mike sighed deeply and muttered under his breath, Lady, I just drive buses. Jacob watched all of this unfold from a spot on the wheelchair lift with wide eyes and whispered to his mom, Is she okay? No, Emily replied flatly. She's not. Eventually, after much shouting and arm flailing, Karen stormed back into her house, muttering about how she was going to fix this neighborhood once and for all. Meanwhile, Emily helped Jacob onto the bus with an encouraging smile and waved goodbye as if nothing had happened. But deep down, Emily knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen sat in her immaculately organized home office, which she liked to call the war room. It was decorated with motivational posters that said things like, Perfection is power and HOA rules are sacred. Her desk was covered in color-coded binders labeled neighborhood infractions, petty grievances, and people who don't wave back. Today, however, Karen wasn't just filing complaints. She was plotting her next move. The Jacob situation, as she now referred to it, had become her personal crusade. Karen believed she had been chosen by fate, or perhaps the HOA gods, to rid Willow Creek of anything that didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. And Jacob's 3-minute busboarding ritual? That was enemy number one. As Karen sipped her organic kombucha, because coffee wasn't dramatic enough for scheming, she began drafting an email. Not just any email. This was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive artistry. It was addressed to the entire HOA board entitled, Urgent Neighborhood Traffic Crisis Threatens Our Community Standards. The email read as follows. Subject, Urgent Neighborhood Traffic Crisis Threatens Our Community Standards. Dear esteemed HOA members, it has come to my attention that a certain incident occurring daily on Maple Street is causing significant disruption to our neighborhood's harmony and traffic flow. While I fully support inclusivity and accessibility, as evidenced by my donation to the Save the Squirrels Foundation last year, I must express concern about the prolonged delays caused by a school bus using a wheelchair lift. This is not about discrimination. It's about efficiency. We cannot allow our streets to become clogged with unnecessary interruptions. Such delays not only inconvenience residents, but also negatively impact property values. Imagine potential buyers witnessing this chaos. Would they want to live here? I think not. I propose we hold an emergency HOA meeting to discuss implementing new regulations regarding traffic management during peak hours. Together, we can restore order and protect the integrity of Willow Creek. Warm regards. Karen, President Willow Creek HOA. Karen hit send with the smug satisfaction of someone who believes they've just solved world hunger. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, imagining herself being applauded at the next HOA meeting for her bravery and leadership. But Karen wasn't done yet. Oh no, she needed more ammunition. Karen decided that if she wanted to win this war, she needed evidence. So she grabbed her iPhone, stepped outside, and began what could only be described as the most ridiculous surveillance operation in suburban history. Every morning for the next week, Karen hid behind her hydrangea bushes, which were trimmed into perfect spheres naturally, and filmed Jacob's bus routine like she was auditioning for a role in a spy thriller. She zoomed in dramatically as the wheelchair lift descended, muttering things like, "Look at this inefficiency," and 3 minutes? 3 whole minutes. At one point, she even tried using a stopwatch to time the process, but accidentally dropped it into her koi pond when Max, Jacob's golden retriever, barked at her from across the street. Karen glared at Max as if he were personally conspiring against her. By the end of the week, Karen had compiled what she considered irrefutable evidence. Shaky videos of Jacob boarding his bus, complete with Karen's whispered commentary, photos of cars waiting behind the bus, which were actually parked cars that weren't inconvenienced at all, and screenshots of Google Maps traffic data showing 0 delays. With her evidence in hand, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She made sure everyone knew it was urgent by sending 3 reminder emails and personally knocking on doors to guilt trip anyone who dared consider skipping it. The meeting took place in Karen's living room, which was decorated with tasteful beige curtains and framed photos of herself posing with various local politicians, most of whom probably regretted shaking hands with her. The room was packed with neighbors who had reluctantly shown up because they feared Karen would fine them for not attending. Karen stood at the front of the room with a PowerPoint presentation titled "Restoring Order, the Case Against Traffic Disruptions." She flipped through slides filled with graphs that didn't actually prove anything, blurry photos of Jacob's bus routine, and dramatic captions like "A neighborhood under siege." "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began in her most self-important tone, "our community is at a crossroads. We can either continue tolerating chaos, or we can take action." One brave neighbor raised his hand. "Karen, isn't this just about a kid getting on a school bus?" Karen gasped, as if he'd suggested outlawing beige paint. "This is about principles," she snapped. "If we allow this kind of inefficiency to continue unchecked, what's next? People parking RVs in their driveways? Children riding bikes without helmets? Cats roaming freely?" Another neighbor muttered under his breath, "Cats already roam freely." Karen ignored him and continued her tirade. "I propose we implement new HOA regulations banning prolonged stops during peak traffic hours. This will ensure our streets remain safe and functional for everyone." At this point, Emily, the mother of Jacob, stood up from her seat in the back of the room. She had been quietly listening, but couldn't stay silent any longer. "Karen," Emily said calmly but firmly, "do you even hear yourself? You're trying to ban a school bus from helping my son get to school safely." Karen smirked condescendingly. "I'm simply suggesting alternatives. Perhaps you could drive him yourself." Emily clenched her fists but kept her composure. Not everyone has the luxury of sitting around all day writing emails about garden gnomes. The room erupted into muffled laughter as Karen's face turned bright red. She tried to regain control by clicking furiously through her PowerPoint slides, but accidentally closed the presentation altogether. Despite Karen's best efforts, most neighbors sided with Emily after witnessing Karen's absurd behavior firsthand. The HOA board voted unanimously against implementing any new traffic regulations, much to Karen's dismay. But Karen wasn't done yet. She had one last trick up her sleeve: filing an official complaint with the city council about Jacob's bus routine. For now, Karen retreated to her war room to lick her wounds and plot her next move. She was determined to escalate the fight. After all, if she couldn't win through HOA rules, she'd take it to the next level: city government. Because nothing says "I'm a reasonable adult" like filing an official complaint about a child with disability. Armed with her folder of evidence, which included blurry photos of Jacob's bus and a pie chart that literally had no data on it, Karen marched into City Hall like she was storming the Bastille. She demanded an immediate meeting with someone, anyone, who could help her restore order to Willow Creek. The poor receptionist at City Hall, a young woman named Sophie who had clearly seen way too much of this kind of nonsense, tried to explain that Karen would need an appointment. An appointment? Karen gasped, clutching her pearls as if Sophie had just insulted her entire ancestry. "Do you know who I am? I'm the president of the Willow Creek HOA. Sophie blinked slowly. "Ma'am, I don't even know where Willow Creek is." Karen huffed, but eventually settled for filling out a formal complaint form. She wrote furiously, using phrases like gross negligence, public safety hazard, and her personal favorite, a direct attack on suburban values. She handed it back with a flourish, convinced she'd just drafted the Declaration of Independence 2.0. What Karen didn't know was that Sophie immediately filed a complaint into the recycling bin. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, word of Karen's antics was spreading like wildfire. The neighbors were done with her nonsense. For years, they had tolerated her ridiculous rules and passive-aggressive emails. Friendly reminder, your trash cans are 2 inches too far from the curb. But this, going after a sweet kid like Jacob, that was the final straw. Leading the charge against Karen was none other than Mrs. Chun, an elderly widow who lived across the street from Karen. Don't let her floral aprons and love of baking fool you. Mrs. Chun was a force to be reckoned with. She had lived through wars, raised 5 kids, and once single-handedly chased off a raccoon infestation with nothing but a broom and sheer determination. Mrs. Chun called an emergency meeting. Not an HOA meeting, Karen wasn't invited, but a real neighborhood meeting in her backyard. People brought folding chairs, snacks, and plenty of grievances about Karen. She fined me $50 because my Christmas lights were too bright. One neighbor complained. She made me repaint my mailbox because it wasn't beige enough. Another added. She called animal control on my cat because he looked suspicious. Someone else chimed in. Mrs. Chun listened patiently before standing up and slamming her hand on the table, like she was leading a rebellion against an evil empire. Enough is enough, she declared. It's time we take Karen down. The crowd cheered as if they were extras in a movie about overthrowing a dictator. The plan Mrs. Chun and the neighbors devised was so brilliant. It could have been written by Shakespeare himself, if Shakespeare wrote revenge comedies about HOA drama. Their goal wasn't just to stop Karen. It was to expose her for who she truly was, a power-hungry tyrant who cared more about rules than people. Step 1. Dig up dirt on Karen. Mrs. Chun assigned this task to Tom, the neighborhood tech guy who worked in IT and spent way too much time on Reddit. Within hours, Tom discovered that Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Things like spa treatments, expensive wine deliveries, and even a subscription box for artisanal cheeses. Step 2. Turn public opinion against her. The neighbors started spreading stories about Karen's antics far and wide. They shared videos of her yelling at Jacob's bus driver, complete with dramatic captions like, "Local tyrant Harris's disabled child," and posted memes comparing Karen to infamous dictators. One particularly popular meme showed her face photoshopped onto Napoleon's body. Step 3. Confront her at the next HOA meeting. The piece de resistance will be confronting Karen in front of everyone at the next HOA meeting with evidence of her corruption and enough public outrage to make sure she couldn't weasel her way out of it. As all this unfolded, Karen remained blissfully unaware that her reign of terror was coming to an end. She spent her days writing more complaint emails, this time about someone's wind chimes being too loud, and practicing speeches for when she inevitably became mayor. It's only a matter of time, she told herself while staring at her reflection. But cracks were starting to show in Karen's perfect facade. For one thing, people had stopped responding to her emails altogether, a fact that infuriated her so much, she started CCING random city officials just to get attention. For another thing, Max, the golden retriever who lived with Jacob, had started pooping exclusively on Karen's lawn. No one knew how or why this happened. Some suspected Mrs. Chun might train him, but it felt like poetic justice. Finally, the day of the HOA meeting arrived. The room was packed. Not because people care about HOA business, but because everyone wanted to see what would happen when Mrs. Chun dropped the metaphorical bombshell. Karen strutted into the room like she owned it, which, technically speaking, she kind of did. She began the meeting as usual, droning on about lawn maintenance and reminding everyone that beige was still the only acceptable color for fences. But then Mrs. Chun stood up. "Karen," she said sweetly but firmly, "I think it's time we discuss something important." Karen frowned. "If this is about those inflatable Halloween decorations again." "It's not," Mrs. Chun interrupted, holding up a folder labeled Evidence. "It's about you." What followed was nothing short of legendary. Mrs. Chun laid out everything. The misused HOA funds, the harassment of Jacob's family, even screenshot of Karen complaining about neighbors in private Facebook groups. Yes, Tom found those too. The The crowd gasped audibly as Mrs. Chun presented each piece of evidence like a lawyer in a courtroom drama. By the end of it, Karen looked pale enough to blend into one of her beige walls. "I can explain," she stammered. But no one wanted to hear it anymore. Not after everything she'd done. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president, effective immediately, and banned her from running for any position ever again. The neighborhood erupted into cheers as Karen stormed out in humiliation. Meanwhile, Jacob's family received an outpouring of support from their neighbors, including offers to help build an even better wheelchair ramp for their driveway. As for Mrs. Chun, she became something of a local hero, a symbol of what happens when good people stand up against petty tyranny. And Max? He kept pooping on Karen's lawn long after she stopped attending HOA meetings. Because some traditions are worth keeping alive. Karen's downfall was the talk of Willow Creek, the once feared HOA president, who had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist and an endless supply of passive-aggressive emails, was now just another disgraced suburban tyrant. But as any good revenge story goes, the real satisfaction wasn't just in Karen's fall from grace. It was in the poetic justice that followed. After being ousted as HOA president, Karen decided she needed to rehabilitate her image. She wasn't going to let a bunch of ungrateful peasants, her words, ruin her reputation. So she did what any self-respecting suburban villain would do. She started a vlog. Yes, Karen launched a YouTube channel called Karen's Corner, Suburban Solutions for a Perfect Life. The first episode was titled, How to Maintain Order in a Chaotic World, Starting with Your Neighbors. It featured Karen sitting in her overly beige living room, lecturing the camera about the importance of community standards while sipping tea from a mug that said #bless. Unfortunately for Karen, her attempt to rebrand herself backfired spectacularly. Within hours, the video was flooded with comments like, "Is this satire? Please tell me this is satire. Karen, no one cares about your beige fences. This is the woman who yelled at a disabled kids bus. Why is she still talking?" One particularly creative commenter wrote, "Karen's Corner? More like Karen's corruption. Can we get Mrs. Chun her own channel instead?" The video quickly became a meme. Someone even edited it into a parody trailer called The Rise and Fall of Suburban Dictatorship, complete with dramatic music and slow-motion clips of Karen angrily pointing at Jacob's school bus. While Karen was busy becoming an internet laughingstock, Jacob's story was gaining traction online. After the HOA meeting where Karen had been exposed, one of the neighbors had posted a video of Mrs. Chun's epic takedown speech on social media. The video went viral overnight, with hashtags like #JusticeForJacob and #DownWithKaren trending on Twitter. People from all over the country were inspired by Jacob's resilience and his family's fight against Karen's nonsense. Donations poured in to help support Jacob's education and mobility needs. A local news station even interviewed him, and Jacob, ever the humble hero, used his moment in the spotlight to thank his neighbors for standing up for him. "My mom always says that kindness is stronger than rules," Jacob said during the interview, "except maybe HOA rules. Those are pretty strong." The clip melted hearts everywhere, and suddenly, Jacob wasn't just a kid from Willow Creek. He was a symbol of hope and perseverance. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chun was basking in her newfound fame as the neighborhood's unofficial leader. People started calling her the General because of her no-nonsense approach to taking down Karen. She didn't mind. If anything, she found amusing. One day, Mrs. Chun received an unexpected package on her doorstep, a golden plaque engraved with the words Neighborhood Hero Award. It had been anonymously sent by one of the neighbors, though everyone suspected Tom, the tech guy. Mrs. Chun hung it proudly in her kitchen, next to her collection of vintage teapots. But Mrs. Chun wasn't just sitting around basking in glory. She had plans, big plans. "We're going to make this neighborhood better than ever," she declared during another backyard meeting. "No more ridiculous fines for Christmas lights or beige-only fences. From now on, Willow Creek will be a place where people actually enjoy living." The crowd cheered as Mrs. Chun unveiled her first initiative, a community garden where everyone could plant whatever they wanted. Even gnomes were welcome. While Jacob and Mrs. Chun thrived, Karen spiraled further into chaos. Her YouTube channel flopped after only 3 episodes. The second one was titled, Why Lawn Flamingos Are Destroying America, and she became the subject of countless memes. But the final blow came when Karen tried to stage a comeback at Willow Creek's annual Spring Festival, a beloved event where neighbors gathered for food, games, and general merriment. Karen showed up uninvited with a booth labeled Karen's Corner, HOA tips and tricks. She brought stacks of pamphlets about lawn care regulations and even set up a suggestion box labeled Complaints About Your Neighbors. It didn't take long for things to go south. First, Max, the golden retriever who had been pooping on Karen's lawn for weeks, wandered over to her booth and did his business right next to her suggestion box. The crowd erupted into laughter as Karen tried and failed to shoo him away with one of her pamphlets. Then came Mrs. Chun, who approached Karen's booth with an air of quiet authority. "Karen," she said sweetly but firmly, "this festival is about bringing people together, not tearing them apart." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but was interrupted by Jacob, who rolled up in his wheelchair, holding a plate of cookies from Mrs. Chun's bake sale. "Want one?" he asked innocently, holding out the plate. Karen stared at him for a long moment before sighing dramatically and walking away without another word. The crowd cheered as Jacob handed out cookies to everyone at the festival, including Max, who happily wagged his tail. As the sun set over Willow Creek that evening, the neighborhood felt more united than ever. People laughed and shared stories while kids played tag on lawns that were no longer subject to Karen's ridiculous rules. Jacob sat with his mom near the community garden, watching as neighbors planted flowers and vegetables together. Mrs. Chun stood nearby, sipping tea from her favorite floral mug and smiling like a proud grandmother watching over her flock. And Karen? Well, let's just say she spent that evening writing yet another angry email, this time addressed to no one in particular, because no one cared anymore. And so ends our tale of suburban drama, petty tyranny, and sweet revenge. What can we learn from all this? Maybe it's that kindness really is stronger than rules. Or maybe it's just that you should never mess with Mrs. Chun, or underestimate a golden retriever named Max. If you enjoyed the story of HOA chaos and ultimate justice, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more hilarious tales of suburban warfare.